The rusty lantern had seen its fair share of ghosts, some real, some imagined. At least that's what Cadence told herself on nights like this. Nights when the wind howled through the old wooden beams, when the neon sign outside flickered like a dying heartbeat, when the last of the regulars had long since stumbled home, leaving only silence and the faint scent of spilled whiskey in their wake. She had just finished wiping down the bar, the rhythmic motion of the cloth against the worn wood soothing in its familiarity, when the door creaked open. Her heart kicked against her ribs. The clock on the wall read past closing, and anyone who belonged here knew the rules. When the lights dimmed, the drinks stopped flowing. Yet someone stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the cold glow of the street lamp outside. Cadence tightened her grip on the rag, forcing her voice steady. "We're closed." The figure didn't move at first, lingering in the threshold, like a ghost reluctant to cross over. Then slowly he stepped inside, the door falling shut behind him with an eerie finality. Tall, worn coat. A presence that sent something crawling up her spine, not quite fear, not quite familiarity. And then he spoke, voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. "Just one drink." Something in the way he said it made her pause. A request, but not just for whiskey, for time, for something unspoken. She should have sent him away, locked the door, forgotten his face. Instead, she reached for a glass. The neon sign of rusty lantern flickered in the cold midnight air, casting a dim glow on the deserted street. Inside, the small dive bar held a stillness that only came at closing time. Cadence wiped the last glass of the night, her movements slow but precise. The echoes of faint music still played on the old jukebox, the last tune chosen by a patron long gone. Tonight had been quieter than usual. Only a few regulars had come by, nursing their drinks in silence before slipping into the night. As Cadence locked the register and turned to stack the chairs, a soft creak at the door caught her attention. She turned, expecting to see someone who had forgotten their jacket or wallet. Instead, a man stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the street lamp outside. "We're closed," Cadence called out, her voice firm but not unkind. The man hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. He was tall, wearing a long overcoat that had seen better days. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but his eyes, there was something in them, something familiar. "Just one drink?" he asked, his voice carrying a rough edge, as if he hadn't spoken in a while. Cadence sighed, glancing at the clock. "One drink, then you have to go." The man nodded and took a seat at the bar. She poured him a whiskey without asking, somehow knowing it was what he wanted. He took the glass, swirling the amber liquid before taking a slow sip. "It's been a long time," he murmured, more to himself than to her. She studied him. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he held the glass. Recognition stirred in her mind. "Do I know you?" The man let out a small, tired chuckle. "Once, a long time ago." Cadence frowned, her mind racing through distant memories. And then it hit her. "Elliot?" A slow nod. "You remember." She exhaled sharply, leaning against the bar. "I thought you—" She shook her head. "You disappeared. No one knew where you went." "I left," he admitted, staring into his drink. "Needed to, but I always meant to come back. Just never got the chance." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken words. Elliot had once been a regular at the Rusty Lantern years ago. Back then he had been full of life, always the one to bring laughter to the place. And then, one night, he was gone. Rumors had spread. Some said he moved away, others whispered of trouble. But no one knew for sure. "Why now?" Cadence asked, quietly. Elliot sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I guess I needed to see something familiar." She nodded, understanding more than she wanted to admit. Life had a way of pulling people apart. But sometimes, just sometimes, it let them cross paths again. "One drink," she said again, though softer this time. Elliot raised his glass in silent gratitude before taking another sip. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like old times. The night stretched on, the neon sign flickering outside as the past and present intertwined in the quiet hum of the rusty lantern. As the whiskey warmed his throat, Elliot glanced around the bar, taking in the faded posters, the scuffed wooden counter, the old jukebox that still held the same songs from years ago. The place hadn't changed much, but Cadence had. She seemed sharper, more guarded. He supposed that made sense. Time hardened people. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Where did you go, Elliot?" He sighed, tapping his fingers against the glass. "Everywhere. Nowhere." Cadence shook her head. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He met her gaze, eyes shadowed with something she couldn't quite name. "I left town because I had to. Some debts, some bad decisions. You remember that fight I got into?" She did. It had been ugly. One of the local troublemakers had pushed him too far, and Elliot had snapped. The fight ended with a broken bottle and police sirens. But the charges never stuck. The other guy had a worse record than Elliot. Still, after that night, he vanished. "I thought you were dead," she admitted. He huffed a small, humorless laugh. "Some days I thought so too." They fell into silence again. Outside, a cold wind rattled the window. Cadence glanced at the door, considering whether she should just tell him to leave. But something in his expression stopped her. "What do you want, Elliot?" "Just to remember for a little while." Cadence watched him, noting the exhaustion in his posture, the way his shoulders seemed to carry too much weight. She had seen that. Look before, in the mirror, on nights when the world felt too heavy. Wordlessly, she grabbed another glass and poured herself a drink. If only for tonight she would let the past breathe. The bottle between them grew lighter as the hours passed. They spoke in fragments, filling in gaps of lost time. Elliot told her about the cities he had seen, the jobs he had taken. Some legal, some not. Cadence told him about the rusty lantern, how she had kept it going despite everything, about the people who had come and gone. "You always wanted to leave this town," Elliot murmured, swirling the remnants of his whiskey. "What happened?" Cadence smiled wryly. "Guess I realized that some places aren't just places. They're people, and when enough people leave, you stay. Someone has to." He studied her for a long moment. "I should have stayed." She didn't answer. Maybe he should have, maybe not. The past couldn't be rewritten, only remembered. Outside, the darkness stretched on. And inside, for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The clock ticked past 3 in the morning. The whiskey bottle was nearly empty. Cadence rubbed her tired eyes and stood, stretching. "You should get some rest." Elliot hesitated. "Yeah, probably." He stood, reaching into his coat pocket. "For the drink." She shook her head. "Call it an old friend's tab." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Still the same Cadence. She walked him to the door. The night air was colder now. Elliot hesitated, glancing back one last time. "Maybe I'll see you around." She gave a small nod. "Maybe." And then he was gone, his silhouette vanishing into the dark. Cadence stood in the doorway for a long moment, before locking up. The rusty lantern was quiet once more, but something lingered in the air, a whisper of the past, a hint of unfinished stories. She sighed, turning off the neon sign. Another night done. Another ghost laid to rest. And maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't done with her yet.